Why did he go upstairs alone? Why wasn't the call made right away? Why was the farewell almost empty? These three whys were born in the same June midnight hour and have lived longer than any of his guests. June in Los Angeles was breathing heat, the kind that sticks to the walls. The house on Benedict Canyon, a tidy box of Hollywood illusions, hosted a party where laughter was louder than it should be and toasts too confident, as if trouble had signed a non-disclosure agreement. Downstairs, jokes about a bride and groom, hints at a wedding to come. Her name, Leonore Lemon, sharp-tongued and built for gossip columns. His, George Reeves, television Superman, a hero without a cape if you believe reality, with one if you believe the screen. "It's time for bed," he says dryly, heading upstairs like a man who's been through this kind of night too many times before. The bedroom door shuts, blocking out some sounds, but not all. Below, glasses clink, music exhales lazily, flirtation plays its final hand. No one knows that the after will begin in minutes. In that fragile pause between floors, a story starts to form, one the studios would later beg people to keep shorter. The gunshot sounds as if it's inside everyone's head. Short, dry, certain. Seconds and reactions trade places. Silence, then whispers, a wait, a look up the stairs. And there it is, the first why, the one without an expiration date. Why not right away? Who made the call? To whom? The testimonies will ripple outward like circles on water, and every circle will have its own narrator. When the night's temperature finally drops, the police will climb the stairs. He's 45, a man whose name has become a synonym for myth. The gun? Beside him. Sheets? Rumpled. The air? Too heavy to breathe. On the table? The kind of items that suddenly seem to matter in nights like this. A glass? A half-smoked cigarette? An unbuttoned shirt? A shadow on the carpet. In the report, there will be a single cold word. Suicide. In the conversations, everything else. Doubts, slips of the tongue, speculations, the raw material from which Hollywood builds its legends. Every omission becomes fertilizer for a new truth. The newspapers arrive with polished phrasing, and beneath the print creep unsigned lines. A life too loud, a room too quiet, some will write. A shot too loud for one gun, others will add. Someone will recall that Leonore always said aloud what others only thought. Someone else, Reeves' earlier relationships, long as bonds, tangled as debts. And someone will whisper that this city has a long memory and even longer arms. From that morning on, facts and rumors will walk side by side. Two shadows, one cast by a lamp, the other by a fire behind the wall. When the farewell is set, it becomes clear, this isn't the Hollywood where mourning is ceremony and grief a required performance. The service, small, restrained, without a Catholic rite, though the deceased was Catholic. At the doors, not a line of colleagues, but a few quiet figures, as if told to speak softer than their pain allows. The headlines will choose formula over arithmetic. No one came. The phrase will outlive the numbers and give birth to the second why. Why so empty? That emptiness will stand in stark contrast to the scale of childhood love for Superman. And from that contrast, a whole panorama of suspicion will grow. Theories surface at once. The stigma of the late 1950s. The word suicide didn't come with public empathy. The secrecy of the industry. Studios hate scandals, and scandals hate cameras. The social divide. A television hero, for children, wasn't part of the guild that mourned its own. All three explanations fit together, a delicate scaffolding on which silence rests. But silence is a statement too, the city's chosen line. Where most biographies would place a period, this story adds an ellipsis. A night where the gunshot sounds like a beginning, not an end. A house split between floors, like stage and backstage. Guests whose testimonies read like rehearsed dialogue. A woman made for gossip columns, and another whose name is whispered in producers' offices. a man who longed for a second role without the cape, and a city that charges too high a price for every wish. Ahead lie versions battling facts, names against names, and the ticking timeline of one evening where every second might be the wrong one. For now, silence. The same silence that fell right after the shot and didn't lift even by the day of the farewell. In that silence, the truth can still be heard. A story someone tried to close and a legend the city chose to reopen. The next wave will rise where the police reports end and Hollywood begins, with its love of secrets, triangles, and decisions made for you. And one last why remains, the most uncomfortable of all. Why are we still repeating someone else's version? And whose night exactly did it become so convenient for?
His path began like that of many young pre-war Hollywood actors. Screen tests, lucky acquaintances, small parts in big films. He appears in the credits as one of the Tarleton twins, a face without a story of its own, yet already familiar. Then came Army newsreels, service, instructional films, and a return to an industry that by the mid-40s looked newer and colder than before. The world moved on, and actors back from the war years had to re-earn their right to the screen. In the early 50s, television seemed to him a temporary bridge, quick fees, steady work, a chance to stay in the field. But the bridge unexpectedly became a road, and the road a dead end. Adventures of Superman exploded. Millions of children's eyes, autographs on postcards, endless appearances in costume at town fairs and Christmas trees. And the louder his name rang out, the narrower the corridor of possibilities became. The label hero for children stuck to any role that required vulnerability, nerve, doubt. He brought a whole country to film auditions, a country that saw only the cape when it looked at him. He tried to break free. He talked about directing several episodes, discussed a darker tone for future seasons, one where Superman would face not just cartoonish evil, but human ambiguity. In parallel came rare film roles that might have become a ticket back, but turned into bookmarks. The audience whispered, "Superman," and ejected the scene from any serious context. In the corridors, there was a story. One of his appearances in a major dramatic film, test audiences received with snickers. The silhouette was too recognizable. The scene was allegedly cut down. There's little proof, but the legend lived because it fit his reality perfectly. The role that earned him fame took the rest away. In everyday life, it looked prosaic and painful. Meetings with producers ended in smiles that meant, "We like you, but..." Journalists asked about flights and bent steel pipes, not about ambitions and new plays. Children asked him to lift a car with one hand. Adults asked him to stay in character. Every public appearance was an invisible contract. No cigarette, no extra drink, no sharp words. Superman must not age, grieve, or bristle. In his 40s, he lived like a courteous ghost, recognized by everyone and understood by few. Where the hero's journey promises overcoming and a new stage, a vicious second act began. Hopes for a feature-length comeback, negotiations, plans to direct, talk of the theater, and calendars with too many blank squares. He tried to add weight off camera, discussed directing, sifted through material, argued about money. But the industry dislikes repackaging without guaranteed box office. His name made television safe and cinema risky. He was too famous for a small part and not bankable enough for a big one. From this, a simple human version of the future tragedy took shape. The feeling of being driven into a cage, a hostage to one's own success. Psychologists would call it learned helplessness, friends tired of the mask. Outwardly, he held on, joked, assured everyone that things were changing. Inside, the clock ticked louder. By the late 1950s, studios were reshuffling the deck. A new kind of masculinity was arriving, harsher, nervier, without boyish smiles. The television hero of 1953 no longer fit the roles to come, and he knew it.
There are versions that it was precisely during this period that personal tensions sharpened. The shift from a long relationship that offered stability and patronage to a new romance that demanded boldness and a renunciation of old debts. In that light, creative impasse and romantic rupture converged into a single sharp corner, like the leg of a chair left out of place. Any misstep, a fall. Any roughness, a scandal. Any weakness, a headline. A slave to one role was a formula he resisted. He was not untalented, not lazy, not a random guest in the profession. He was a man for whom one stroke of luck blocked all other roads. Therein lies both tragedy and paradox. The role he endowed with conviction took from him the right to be anyone else. If you believe in the hero's journey, trial is followed by a helper, the helper by revelation, revelation by reward. In his case, the helper was discipline, the revelation a bitter grasp of his limits, and the reward not what he sought. The reward he received was the image's eternity, and less time left for himself. This chapter is about how pressure accumulates, about how loud applause can sound like a door closing, and about how, unnoticed by everyone, the person standing beneath a chorus of bravo begins to hear only one sound: the dull thud of leaden wings that won't let him rise. Her name was Toni Mannix, a woman with unerring taste for luxury and for gestures one remembers. Her gift was simple and dangerous. She could make men more successful by persuading them the success had already arrived. When George found himself at her side, he received not only warm affection, but an infrastructure: car, comforts, contacts, the sort of cushion that lets an actor, squeezed between contracts and expectations, breathe easier. Their home had a great deal of order and a great deal left unsaid. The kind of relationship where words are spoken less often than decisions are made. In the Chronicles, their union was sometimes described as a quiet married life without the marriage, stability, mutual favors, gratitude, and an invisible wake of power. Behind Toni loomed the figure of her husband, Eddie Mannix, MGM's firefighter, a man who professionally put out other people's blazes. Stories circulated about him. Supposedly, one phone call was enough to stop a burning scandal from smoking. Supposedly, he knew the right people in the wrong places. Supposedly, the circle of his loyalties was wider than his formal job. Some dismissed these legends as glossy scare tales, others treated them as the alphabet of the studio era. Either way, the name Mannix made any domestic scene more dimensional. Beside him, everything acquired a shadow. Within this coordinate system, the appearance of Leonore Lemon was not just a romance, but a challenge to the geometry. Leonore was Toni's mirror opposite, quick to laugh, barbed, fast-tongued, with the manners of someone unafraid of loud words and uninvited jokes. If Toni built a shelter, Leonore switched on the spotlights. Their names could not share a single frame without sparks. For George, this change meant more than swapping partners. It was a gesture of taking off the protection and walking alone. Toni meant stability. Leonore meant risk. He chose risk. From that moment, any detail became fodder for rumor. Whom did he call that evening? What did he say? Under whose umbrella did the influence fall? Some claimed Toni took the breakup hard, not in a melodramatic sense, but in an organizational one. The familiar construction of control and care was collapsing. Others retold as anecdotes Leonore's cutting remarks. She could, they said, predict the shot before it sounded, or speak as if death were merely part of an overlong scene. Logically, all this is poor humor. As legend, it's perfect masonry. It proves nothing reliably, and yet it assembles into a fine intrigue. The triangle grew a fourth corner, the city. Hollywood of the 1950s was not only a dream factory, but a system of mutual services, debts, and compromises. In such a system, changing the woman at your side is not only a private drama, but a political act. With whom do you dine now? Who will go to bat for you in the gossip column? Whose name scents your living room? And conversely, on whose territory are you no longer a guest? In the language of chronicles, all this is wrapped in euphemisms. In the language of life, it is configurations of power. Around George, there had always been many acquaintances and few who were truly close. Television fame gathers crowds and breeds loneliness.
Everyone wants a fragment of the image. Almost no one wants the heavy, unglamorous remainder of the person. Colleagues from Superman respected his work discipline, but industrial friendship is not the kind that gets measured at a funeral. In moments of transition, from Tony to Leonore, this public closeness showed itself especially clearly. Doors were left ajar but not flung open. Smiles were wide, handshakes empty. Even those who loved him, for his generosity at children's events, for his patience with fans, did not set the agenda of major studios and did not influence the tone of the papers. And those who did set and influence found it more advantageous to watch in silence. Rumors of the Mannix orbit's long arm arose almost automatically as soon as the line "Tony, George" snapped. There was never enough concreteness, but there was no shortage of hints. From scattered testimonies, a muffled chorus was assembled. Someone had heard one situation was fixed. Someone knew that calls were made here or there. Someone was sure that interventions happened more than once. Whether that is fair or not is a question without an answer. But for the night when the shot rang out, one thing was enough: the public's confidence that if they want it, it gets done. Thus is born an atmosphere in which any tragedy immediately seeks a director. Leonore in this narrative is a paradoxical figure. People like to cast her as a prankster of fate, a woman without brakes, and at the same time as the person who remained downstairs at the very second when everything upstairs came apart. Her sharpness easily turns her into a convenient villain in someone else's biography. Yet she and Tony are alike in one respect. Both become screens onto which others project their fears about power, dependency, and the price of love. In Hollywood, a woman beside a famous man is always either a guardian angel or a fatal mistake. There is no third option. And still, beyond the snare of gossip, a simple human diagram is visible. George reached toward a new life. Different tone, different energy, different circle. Tony gripped the threads of the familiar. Eddie, if the legends are to be believed, held the city's threads. Leonore held the pause, the way an actress holds a room's attention, boldly, often out of place. Between these 4 points, very little free air remained. When it ran out, what remained were versions. Then came the night. Those very minutes when trifles decide everything. Who entered first? Who called second? Who stood in the doorway and kept silent? Where protocols are dry and voices break. Where household objects acquire legal roles. Where the shadow of power suddenly falls across the carpet of a private home. In the next chapter, we'll walk that carpet, step by step, examining the seams. The timing of the calls, the inconsistencies, the disputes over prints and residues, the second autopsy. And that eternal question Hollywood loves more than facts. Could it have been otherwise? The night split into 2 planes, a locked bedroom upstairs and the living room below. Music, chatter, a touch of bravado. The crack divides everything into before and after. Then comes a pause from which the main questions will grow. Who went to the door? Who made the call? Why not immediately? In testimonies, this pause breathes. Some say minutes, others tens of minutes. It is within it that the feeling takes shape that something is wrong. The report records the facts. A man, 45, a gunshot, a pistol nearby, alcohol in the blood. The room is an ordinary room after a calamity. But around the facts are small, rough edges that will feed the theories. Some witnesses are sure there was a single shot. Others heard 2, even 3 cracks. The official line remains terse, while the night's noise lives a life of its own. Procedure adds new angles for doubt. Fingerprints on the weapon, either unreadable or not recorded clearly.
Gunshot residue? Was it tested, and how? Most irritating to skeptics is the quick embalming of the body before all final samples were taken, a utilitarian decision that the mythology reads as a desire to close the room quickly. Nevertheless, the examination returns to the conclusion that will become official: suicide. Later, at the family's insistence, a second examination follows and reaches the same conclusion. But distrust has already taken root. From here, three competing versions are born: accidental death, drunken bravado, a weapon at hand, carelessness. This hypothesis explains the commotion and the jagged timing, but it cheapens the long psychological exhaustion of recent years. Suicide, the culmination of the dead end of the slave to one role. Typecasting, empty calendars, the impossibility of taking off the cape. The version is officially supported, but it doesn't silence the night's rustles, the delayed call, the witnesses' discrepancies. A third party, the most cinematic, the offended, the jealous, the influential figures of the industry. There is little evidence, but this version aligns with the audience's expectations of Hollywood, where great feelings are propped up by great power. For every pro, there is a con. Procedural sloppiness can be explained by heat, panic, simple human error. The psychological version can be confirmed by the general background, though not by every detail. In the dry residue remains a set of mismatching small truths, each serving its own larger story. The media will make this night beautiful: cigarette smoke, half shadows, a phone call to the wrong place. The beauty of retrospect cements emotional plausibility, and that is the fuel of rumor. The farther from the date, the louder the versions sound, and the quieter the report. And yet, one thread doesn't break. Whichever interpretation seems persuasive to you, the day of farewell remained intimate. That intimacy rhymes with the pause after the shot, a collective, we don't know what to do with this death. In this death, the main thing is not the crack of the shot, but the silence the next day. The farewell was intimate. A few restrained faces, a brief service, none of the obligatory ranks of stars at the door. The contrast with the scale of the on-screen myth produced the headline formula: nobody came, though there was no literal emptiness. What there was demonstrative privacy. The first key is the stigma of the late 1950s. The word suicide did not fit into public empathy. PR departments and agents preferred distance. Condolences? Yes. Cameras at the door? No. Thus, a sanitary cordon of silence is born, not from forgetfulness, but from fear of catching a scandal. The second is logistics and ritual. A non-public format for the service, the absence of the customary Catholic rite, the subsequent transport of the remains, and the family's legal steps smeared the farewell across time. There was no single big day to which the trade would converge. The third is the industry's social matrix. Reeves was hugely famous on television, but not of the upper, guild circle of cinema that by default provides a grand send-off. Under normal conditions, status might have been offset by friendship. But the conditions were abnormal. Nearby were rumors, triangles, questions. Industrial friendship turned into polite neutrality. Let the story die down. The fourth is human fear. Any photograph at the entrance could become the caption to someone else's version: new, hid, involved. Those came whose grief outweighed the risk, but the system that loves safe narratives did not. And yet, to say nobody is wrong. People did come. They simply did not come as befits a star, and it is precisely this mismatch that became the legend. Here, the hero's journey closes its circle. The gift of the role turns into its price. Fame granted the image eternity, but narrowed the ring of living people around him. Hollywood, so adept at making gods, just as easily leaves their human part outside the brackets. With time, there will be films and books. Each will cement its own version: himself, misadventure, a third hand. But the shot of the half-empty hull will remain. In it lies the industry's chosen answer: silence as safe policy. And in that silence, the essential is audible. The rupture between the myth and the man the myth found it did not need.